Here is Sailor 940, a blue ink. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. This is a very dark, sheening blue, so also a smear hazard on certain papers. As a dark blue, I won't say it shades so much as it sheens, but also isn't any kind of shift in the tone by paper. The sheen persists even on most non-fountain pen friendly paper. So if you use a lot of cheaper papers and want sheen, this may be good for you. Because of the sheen, it isn't for me, though it is a very good ink. The pen for today is a Retro 51 with a broad nib. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. As a dark blue that we're seeing on the page, it almost runs to that realm of thinking that it might have been a blue-black, but darker blues sometimes go there. We have no feather and no spread, and we don't really have shading. The areas that look like shading are sheen that come through on the page, but it is still there. If you look at "but" on the first line, it's in the middle of the U that the sheen starts to come in and really is present on the T. The I directly underneath that, all sheen. Cure to the left of that, no sheen. Looking at the back of the page, between the wiggling fingers, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. Let's take a look at some other inks from the same manufacturer. Here is Sailor Studio 160. Here is Sailor Studio 224. Here is Sailor Studio 240. Here is Sailor Studio 341. The next writing sample is done in a Portage reporter's notebook. We get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it's not shading, it's sheening. So these areas like the CK in back on the first line, where it starts to look like it's getting darker, it's not getting darker, it's getting sheen. So if you like the sheen, this is good. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. The next writing sample is done on a national brand Steno notebook. Once again, we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine, showing that this is a very opaque ink. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread, has a few moments where the sheen that would look like shading does come through, but it's very few. This paper really did eat it up. It's a more absorbent paper, so that type of thing is bound to happen. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook. Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread, doesn't shade, sheens a little less than it did on the Clairfontaine. Again, where it looks like it might be shading, like the Y of delay on the second line, that's not shading, that's the sheen that's coming through. That with the right light really pops on the page. It stands out against the quad rule with no problems whatsoever, making this a really good ink to use if you like quad rule paper. Looking at the back of the page, we do see a couple areas where the ink got a little deeper into the page. It got nowhere near bleeding. I do think that on a majority, you could write on the back of this page, though there are a few of those spots. The real determination is, would these detract from what you were writing on this side? And I don't think it would be any kind of a problem because of how dark this ink is. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Diamine Eau de Nil. Here is Jinhao Blue. Here is Kaweco Royal Blue. Here is Krishna Christmas Eve. The next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook. Here we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. Really rather surprising because this paper has a tendency to lighten it up a little bit. Now, there's almost no sheen that really comes through. There's a few spots, but there's almost none. It's not feathering, not spreading, not shading. Again, those couple areas that look like it's shaded, really that's the sheen. So such on the second line, that H that looks a little bit darker, that's the sheen affecting the paper, not shading. Really stands out against this quad rule. Very good ink for a student to use in a lab environment. And I'm rubbing it, I'm not seeing it smear on this paper. So while this ink could be a smear hazard, it's not with this lab notebook. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page. Here is Pilot Cosmosu or Cosmos. Here is Diamine Autumn Oak. Here is Private Reserve Plum. Here is Pilot Mixable Yellow. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. Here we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does feather and it does spread and it does both of those quite a bit, really making it kind of distracting to see. Now, to be fair, I am writing with a broader nib and it's a wetter broad, which, isn't the best combination for on this paper. Perhaps if you were using a much drier fine, this would work out better, but I really am not happy with what I'm seeing here. I don't see any of the sheen coming through, so we're not seeing any kind of shading happening. I don't know that this pen was a great choice with this paper. Looking at the back of the page, we see tons of spots where the ink gets very deep into the page, constantly deep into the page, meaning you cannot take notes on the back of this page without corrupting both sides. However, it did not touch the page underneath. So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? This Retro 51 Broad is a wet pen and really brings a good amount of the sheen over a nice dark blue. It doesn't shade, it sheens. Off camera, I went from medium flow stub, and the tone and sheen, or shading, if you were to want to call that, they were unchanged. So I don't think it matters what pen you put this in. The result is going to be the same, and that really makes this a dealer's choice. I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.